Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast, the show that educates, supports, and advocates for the veteran community. Your host, Dr. Tyler Piron, U.S. Army retired, will bring you exciting conversations with amazing guests about resources, research, and military history, all geared to helping our warriors to come home well. Here's your host, Dr. Tyler Piron.
Welcome back to Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Tyler Piron, and today we are going to talk with someone who does something that I can't do, which is create art. Now, you may be as surprised as I was to learn that the National Marine Corps Museum, the one that you drive up right past I-95, has an artist in residence. And I was like, what the heck? I wouldn't have even thought about that. But we have him here. His name's Kris Battles. He goes by Kris. He has a long history with the Marine Corps, and he's currently up there making art and really recording some of those poignant and insightful things that happen every day when you're in service, capturing those images, capturing the Marine Corps especially, which is always really cool. Kris, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well.
I'm very glad to be here, Tyler. Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. What is an artist in residence, and why in the world does the Marine Corps Museum have one?
Well, so I'm currently the second Marine Corps artist in residence. A Colonel Charles Waterhouse, who was a wonderful man, held the post for years, ever since the 70s. He retired in the early 90s. A great painter, a great Marine, was wounded on Iwo Jima, got out of the Marine Corps in 1946, had been an illustrator, a professional illustrator for years, very qualified, very good illustrator. Went to Vietnam as a civilian combat artist for the NACAL program, which was a Navy program sending civilians over. And through that experience, his work sort of spoke for itself. And then a few years later, in 1975, they decided, well, we need somebody to do for the Marine Corps a series of historical prints based upon our history. And so Colonel Waterhouse, who was a former Corporal Waterhouse, was then commissioned as a major, a special duty officer or limited duty officer major, and then was given the task of creating a series of historical illustrations. And then one thing led to another, and he kept doing great work for the Marine Corps, and he finally retired as a colonel in the Marine Corps.
That's amazing.
Wonderful man.
You always hear these stories about bands, and, I know people in the bands and things like that. And okay, I could get it. They're out in public and there's lots of opportunities for PR and those type things. But an artist in residence, that sort of sounds antithetical to what the Marine Corps would normally be known for.
Well, it is a different kind of thing. One doesn't obviously usually put art and combat together.
Mm-hmm.
Corps especially, there are other branches that might be considered more suitable for that sort of thing. But the Marine Corps loves to tell its story. The Marine Corps actually is quite poetic in a sense. We have what we call warrior poets. A lot of the Marines are, in a sense, warrior poets.
Mm-hmm.
We believe very strongly in our philosophy, and we believe very strongly in our lore and the story that's behind what we do. And so combat art comes in and is able to tell the story in a way that is very emotional and intellectual as well, and can get to areas of the culture that may or may not have been open to seeing that or hearing that story. And so, yeah, it is a sort of antithetical to what you'd think the Marine Corps is all about, but in reality, they fit together very well. So as the artist in residence currently, my job is to create a series of historical illustrations from Vietnam era, where Colonel Waterhouse had left off, to the current day, as well as running the Marine Corps combat art program. So I have sort of two hats. The one hat is doing the artwork. I also do combat art, and we'll explain the differences, I'm sure, in a bit. But I do illustrations and combat art, but I also run or manage the Marine Corps combat art program. So I send out portfolio inquiries or calls for portfolios. I gather the portfolios. We have a committee that meets, and we decide if somebody's got the mettle to be a combat artist with the Marine Corps, and then we can enlist them in a sense. We don't have an MOS anymore, but we're going to try to remedy that, we hope. So we have a group of several, about 5 uniformed Marine Corps combat artists who are basically, their day job is to do their Marine Corps MOS, their military occupational specialty. But on the side, or whenever they can, they do sketches and paintings and that sort of thing for the collection. And it's based upon, as you said, what we're seeing in the Marine Corps. So they're basically painting what they see in everyday Marine Corps life. And so we also have about 5 or 6 very active civilian artists who volunteer. We send them, we pay for their travel to a place. They go, they experience it, and they create artwork, and they donate that artwork to the Marine Corps. And
That's
so
amazing.
that's really a great, I mean, it's quite a service that they're rendering. People don't realize that it's, starving artists, but they're willing to do this. So most people don't think also that an artist will risk their lives in a sense, and in a very real sense sometimes, for their craft, and also then not get paid for it. Some of these artists, the civilians, they don't get paid for it. And the uniformed artists, they're doing it also. They're being paid, of course, as military, as uniformed Marines, but they are not, they don't have time set aside for their drawing. So they're doing it also on their own time, half the time. So they're also rendering a service.
But that sounds like a big ask to say, hey, I know you're doing this, whatever the job is, full time, whether you're an infantryman or a logistician or running operations or whatever task it is. Hey, but here's an additional duty that's totally unrelated to your day job. Just do your best. Oh, but you have to apply first.
Oh yeah. So we kind of say, we're the fewer the prouder of the United States Marine Corps combat artists. So we're even a smaller group, and we're hard to get into, we hope. And you do have to prove yourself. One of the things we look for is not only the ability, you have to have the physical and mental ability to deploy. Whether you're a civilian or a Marine, you have to have the ability to go to a place that's perhaps not the greatest place in the world, and you're able to wander about smartly, as they say. You're able to, in a very mature fashion, go around relatively self-governed. They'll of course have people that are helping you out and making sure you don't get hurt and that sort of thing. But you're very much a self-starter. You're having to find the images. You're having to go out and figure out where to go, and you have to be sort of a self-starter in this environment that's very challenging, and also be able to create on top of that. When you may be very cold, it may be very hot, or it may in other ways be very dangerous. So you have to find that in the event. It's very hard to find that kind of an individual. So, but you have to, on top of that, I guess is what I'm trying to say, on top of the fact that you have to be skilled in your emotional and physical state, you also have to be skilled in your vocation. So you have to have skills in reportage drawing. You have to be able to draw well from life. You have to be able to create artwork on a very quick turnaround time, half the time we're out in the field. So you have to have both skill sets in order to be a combat artist.
Yeah, sounds like a fascinating additional duty. Now, back in the day, and I think you touched on it a little bit, there was an actual job who somebody like your entire MOS, military occupation, was to do combat art. Does that still happen? Is how did that begin? How did that end? And what's the current status of it?
We currently have a secondary officer's MOS. So if you're an officer, you can have a secondary MOS, but it's not something that you can do full time. It's just something that MOS number in your record book will allow, will tell the units that, oh, this is legitimate. This is the Marine Corps function, legitimacy that you can use. And when you're in country, to say, look, this isn't just some crazy idea that we made up, real thing. So we started originally, the Marine Corps Combat Art Program started in 1942, and it came out of the Division of Public Relations. General Robert Denig was tasked with creating the Division of Public Relations, and out of that, he selected top quality journalists. They were looking for photographers. They were looking for artists and illustrators, and so they created the several branches of this, the Division of Public Relations, and of course the war ended and it was downsized a bit, and then it was brought about for Korea, and then once again in Vietnam, and it was a very big program in Vietnam. So, but you actually had a military occupational specialty of combat artists that you could recruit out of art schools and get quality people give them, make them Marines. They'd have to go to boot camp first, and then you would, or if they were already maybe officers, they came in as an artist, but you then deployed them as Marine Corps combat artists in uniform.
Wow. And they don't have that anymore. The sort of downsizing, a little more focus, or
So
just the change. What is the status now?
Yeah, well, so after Vietnam, it basically it fell away, and so if something is not being done well, it sort of gets lost in the sauce, so to speak. It kind of gets it's kind of like an appendage, a vestigial organ or whatever they say. It sort of fell off.
Yeah.
So years go by, and you basically the program then became sort of it was out of the it was before the Marine Corps Museum, but it was out of the History and Museums Division of the Marine Corps. They still had combat artists, but it was very much in a very like what we have right now. So we would hire, they would make a call for portfolios. They'd choose some people. They would select these individuals who were willing to go. That they would send them over to like wherever's going, Somalia or whatever it was, and then they would come back the same way, do some fine art back in the States, and submit the sketches that they had done in country, and then they would go back to their day jobs. So it didn't have a strict MOS as before, but it was still a functioning combat art program.
That's just fascinating. Do the other services have something similar, or they used to and they don't anymore?
Very
Uh,
similar.
yeah.
So every branch we have, so the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and the Coast Guard, they all have a combat art program, and they're all, of course, kind of very small programs. There's, it's because it's hard to find these kind of people, as we said, and
Yeah.
and you have, most of them are very similar to what we do. They depend upon the dutiful faithful citizen to come and say, hey, I'd like to do artwork for you guys, because there's not a lot. Most are not commissioned works. They're usually donated works where travel is paid for and that sort of thing. The Air Force traditionally uses a lot of the societies of illustrators, and the societies will send out artists, and they'll pay a little bit of travel, and those artists will submit their artwork once every 2 years or so, or maybe once every year. I can't remember how they used to do it. I think it was once every 2 years. The Air Force would meet and get they'd have a little gala and have it was really kind of a neat thing. And then they donate the work.
That's really neat.
That's pretty neat. Yeah. And then the Navy I had worked for the Navy after my enlistment as a Marine Corps combat artist. I worked for the Navy as a civilian artist a few years back. And it's a similar situation. I'm a GS for the Marine Corps, and I was a GS for the Navy. So the Navy has two government workers, civil servants who are artists, and I guess the official term is visual information specialist. But it's a
of course they had to come up with some obtuse thing.
Yeah, it's very boring sounding. But so they have two on staff dedicated combat artists who also travel. They send them all over the globe on ships and different places where the Navy is doing things, and they record things through sketching and photography, and then they do paintings and sculptures back in the States. And they're up in the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C.
I've talked to the historian of the Navy on a prior event, and it was always fascinating how much the Navy puts into their history. And I was an Army guy, and I don't think we do it nearly as well as the Navy or Marine Corps does. Just it's a different focus. We're a lot bigger, but also not as much of a history focused effort. And that's just my perspective, but every service does a lot of things. So I guess maybe broad brushes are always fair.
I must say the Army has a very good art program. They've got a great collection. Of course, it's a very huge collection, but a very good quality. If you ever get a chance to go to Fort Belvoir,
I've been there many times. Yeah.
If you ask, you can send an appointment and get to see the combat art collection. There is some artwork in their new museum up in the gallery, so that's good. The new Army Museum is open.
That kind of leads me to my next question, which is, where does all this art go? Where is it? Obviously, you're at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Easy to display. You're kind of already there. But is it tied into exhibits? Is it separate? Is it, hey, here's the art from the combat artist? Where does it fit into the whole museum part?
Well, I think you kind of nailed it pretty well. It's in the collection. in storage. Some of it, it's in exhibits. Some of the museum exhibits have artwork in them, and reproductions as well as originals. Some of it is dedicated in the gallery. We have an actual gallery. It's a beautiful gallery at the museum. And we have a show that rotates in and out about every year and a half. And so we show it. We also have a lot of our artwork is at the Pentagon. We also have work in the Commandant's residence in DC at 8th and I. And also we have a traveling exhibit that goes around the country to different venues and shows our work to the public.
That makes sense. I've been to the Pentagon a lot and walked through the halls, and just walking through the halls, there's always things to see, which I always find kind of fascinating if you're in a different area than you normally work in and you're like, "Oh, this is really cool." Some sort of historical or awards, Medal of Honor, what have you. There's all sorts of cool memorabilia walking around the halls if you know where to look.
They do really well in some of the exhibits in the Pentagon. People don't realize it. They
Mhm.
go all out. We always, all of our services, we always kind of joke that we have the biggest collection that nobody ever gets to see.
I believe it.
We have, even the CIA has an art program that's a lot less well known, obviously, and they only commission a few works every once in a while, but they have a great collection of very nice paintings done about CIA stories that they can tell, obviously, that have been declassified, and they do wonderful paintings that they commission out to do. But nobody gets to see it half the time because you have to get a special pass and that sort of thing. And so a lot of the time, people either don't know about these collections or they have to go to get on base to see it and that sort of thing. But we luckily at the Marine Corps Museum or the National Museum of the Marine Corps and at, for example, the Army Museum, we are quite accessible to the public. So you don't need to come in to a gate. You don't need to have a special visitor pass. It's free to get in. You just go through the security screening in the beginning in the front door and you're in, free of charge.
That's always amazing. So you talked a little bit about the types of art, everything from statues to watercolors to pencil. And I personally have seen a ton of artwork. I looked up some of yours just to get a better sense. And what I really was struck by, it was not these big moments. It was all these small moments where somebody's, a group of folks are doing something. It wasn't like, in the middle of a pitched battle necessarily, but the level of detail and the little small touches that really lend itself to, you were there, you saw this site, and then we're able to capture it.
Yeah, our motto, sort of informal motto, is "Go to war, do art," and encapsulates in a rather simple way, but a true way, what we do. So we go to war or to whatever thing that you need to experience, whether it's training or some sort of overseas deployment somewhere, whether in combat or in training, and you experience it. You, as an artist, you go and experience it. You look at it, you see, you follow, you experience it, right? So then you also then do art based on that experience. So then you, in whatever way your talent expresses itself, whether it's sculpture or painting or drawing, you then create a story that's faithful to what you experienced, but that does it in a way that's a little bit deeper than just a photograph or the written word, even though those are very expressive, creative methods.
It's funny. A friend of mine had sent me some pictures of this display in the Pentagon, and it was a sketch, or it was a watercolor or maybe colored pencils, but they had sent me a photo of it, and it was of the porta-johns in Iraq that somebody had. Are you familiar with this?
I actually have my own. So the funny thing about these, like you say, these images of life, most of the time it's the small things. Not the combat scenes, because military life in general, even deployed, is very much common everyday experiences, even if they're in a very strange environment. So you've got your latrine, or your head, as we like to call it in the Marine Corps and Navy. You have these various interesting ways to either feed the troops or to deal with the results of that feeding.
A very nice way to put it.
I have a whole series myself of sketches that I've done in various climes and places, as they say, Haiti or Afghanistan or Iraq or all over the globe, where I've drawn either urinals or porta johns or those pipes that they'd put in the ground to take care of that sort of thing.
Hmm.
It's a very interesting story, and the funny thing about that kind of story and that kind of image, it's memorable, and it's something that a person can say, that's exactly what it was like, and it's kind of humorous, you know.
And
Uh,
it's not the kind of thing that people would capture otherwise necessarily. Like, hey, yeah, this is where I go to urinate. Like, yeah, but it's faithful to the experience.
right, yeah, and even if it's just the places where they slept or the
Yeah.
Bob look like, and this, one of my favorite scenes is a scene where these young Marines are talking around this ammo can. They've got a little fire going in because it's November in Iraq and it's cold in the morning. And it's just called, and they're reading books and talking. It's called A Little Light Reading. And it's not combat. Um, that very day we went on a patrol, and I've got some sketches and photographs from the patrol, and I've done work but based on that experience. But that scene right there, it's not glorious or glamorous, but it is real, and it is something that so many people can relate to, whether or not they were in combat, because the majority of Marines and sailors and soldiers, they don't experience combat. Even though they go and risk their lives, they're in a support function. They're helping the fight, and their lives and their stories are important to tell too.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, it's most people don't end up in combat, even if you're in a combat zone. And so it's like, oh, we try to, a lot of movies and things try to spice it up. But the reality is that the boring stuff that makes everything happen is the really important things. And we often overlook it, which is what I really liked about all the images that I was looking at from the Marine Corps Museum's art program. I said, oh, I get that, down to the graffiti on somebody was on watch, and it was a picture of some folks just up in a tower, and there's graffiti up in the tower. And I said, that is dead on. That is exactly uh, the type of thing that I would expect. If it was all pristine, I would be like, no, that's fake.
Yeah,
Yeah, things like that.
and we paint. So there's a couple functions also for why we do what we do. So General Dennig said that this, he was speaking of World War II, but he said this is a people's war, and the American the public has a right to know, has a need to know, and a right to know what we are doing. And so we are, one of the functions therefore is information. So we give the public, the people back home who sent their sons and daughters, we give them the true story of what's going on as unvarnished as we can.
No, that's absolutely amazing.
We have
So go ahead.
historical, right? So we serve history, and so we're painting for today's information, but we're also painting for 100 years from now, because historians will love to argue about what this type of bullet was or that type of rifle and that sort of thing. But we are providing also pictures which they can look at and study and even publish with their works 100 years from now. And so we provide a very important historical role as well in the future.
So I have a quick sort of almost a legal question. So if it's part of the Marine Corps Museum, is it under public license? Can somebody use it? How do they access it? If you're a art history major, or you're interested in militaria, or I can think of 1,000 reasons somebody would be interested in doing research about, hey, you've been around since the 1940s. How do I see all this stuff?
Well, we have a couple ways you can do it. So all of our originals are the property of the United States government, of course, right? But the images themselves, so the digital images, those are public domain. And so if an author is writing a book, say on Fallujah, and he says, I'd like to get some information and some images, he can contact the history division and the archives to get photographs and information, but he can contact also the art collection to get images that were done artistically. And as you know, art history forever has been depicted a lot for as long as it was written.
Mhm.
Well before the camera came around, there were drawings, even cave paintings in a way, tell the great exploits of the hunters and that sort of thing. But so these images can be very helpful, and so an author can contact the museum or the history division, that sort of thing, and these images can be made available in digital form for them to use to publish and that sort of thing. They're not copyrighted in that sense. So authors, if they get permission, they can freely use these images.
No, that's amazing. I figured as much, but I thought I'd ask because, the Library of Congress and all these other places have such great collections of things up
Mhm.
in the DC area, but so much of it has been digitized. You can go use it. You can
Right.
go and do your own research. Go look at it. Find something you like. That's one of the neat things about these programs. Is it's a public benefit. It's not just a self-licking ice cream cone about, hey, the Marine Corps is awesome. We're going to make some awesome Marine Corps artwork, and we're
Yeah.
going to put it in our super secret safe, and you'll never see it.
Right.
Yeah, it's publicly available. It's out there. It's made to be consumed by the people.
And we also have a website that we've contracted out that's called requestaprint.net. And it's all one word, requestaprint.net. And it's got a bunch of different museum collections on it. And
Mhm.
Marine Corps' art collection, and one of them is the Navy's art collection. And you can go through there and scroll through and press on tabs for, let's say you're looking for something from Vietnam. You can click on that section and find
Very cool.
and you can actually order prints of those images through that website. Those will cost you, but they're still in that sense available. And that's also a good way of researching images, um, besides just Googling.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely put it on the show notes, folks. So if you're driving, don't worry about it. I'll put it in the show notes. You can click on that later if you're interested to go look it out. And we'll also have the Marine Corps National Museum of the Marine Corps link. It's right. It's a gorgeous facility. As you're going up 95, it's very distinctive. As you go up 95 right by Quantico, it's outside of Quantico, so you don't have to go through all the gates and all those things. At least the last time I went. So that's always a bonus. Uh, the only time I've ever been pulled over on base was on Quantico, out in the middle of nowhere, out on the side. And I was going like 2 miles over, and some couple MPs tried to pull me over. It was a pretty funny event. I was taking someone to the brig actually,
Oh,
uh, and I was leaving, and I'm like, "Why is this pickup truck behind me with his whoopee?" Like I thought it was a construction vehicle.
right.
It was a couple of Marine Corps MPs with their bicycles in the back of the truck. And by golly, they wanted to give me a ticket for speeding 2 miles a mile over the limit. I was
Right.
laughing. It was pretty much fun. Hey, so we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about what in the world is a combat artist? How do you become one? You have to apply. And you also have civilians that are interested. Uh, if someone is interested in being a combat artist, how do they get in touch with you? How do they apply? What's sort of the process for that?
So the basic process is we like to see about 10 to 20 works of any medium, but we are reportage type drawers. We believe very strongly in sketching from life. The most important skills we have are not necessarily being able to paint a very nice painting in the studio, although that is part of our job. But we really are looking for people who can draw what they see in a challenging environment, and draw it well, and in whatever style they have. But they should be very accustomed to drawing from life. Um, we're looking for about 10 to 20 works that show an aptitude for drawing from life, and also paintings if you want to send those as well. And so also a bio with information on your age and that sort of thing, and your where you went to school, a basic bio, um,
Hmm.
why you want to be a combat artist and that sort of thing, the skills you may bring to it, and then we'll look at your work. We have a committee that will meet, and we'll also interview the candidates that show promise. Um, but really, it's all about the portfolio, as you know. With any art endeavor, it's all about the portfolio. Now, we also add to that, you have to have the portfolio, but you also have to have the skills to be able to go to a challenging environment and do your craft in that environment.
Yeah, it's one thing to have it in a beautiful studio with all the lighting and all the materials and everything like that, and doing it in Djibouti. Two different environments.
And we
Absolutely.
actually have sent artists to Djibouti a few years back, so that is very real. And a lot of these places, as you know, they are not garden spots. Like the Marine Corps has a wonderful way. We haven't fought in France in over 100 years. We don't send to France or Italy anymore. Usually, they're not the best places on the planet. But
No, they're usually the worst. Yes, absolutely. Hey, so I want to ask you one last thing, or one of the last things. you've painted a lot of things, you've drawn a lot of things. What was your most memorable artwork and why was it? If you could tell us about it, what it looks like, things like that.
So there's two of them. There's the one that I mentioned before, which was a little light reading, and it's actually on display in the museum in the offices of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation at the museum. So you can see that if you come to the museum. Be kind and knock on their door, and they'll let you see it. It's right in the foyer of the offices there. And it's a large painting. It's in oil, but it shows a group of Marines, like I said, just talking in a November morning in Iraq before they go on patrol. They're actually about to hand over the FOB, the forward operating base, to the local Iraqi army. And so they're also packing up, getting ready to go, and that sort of thing. But in the image, you can see them talking and reading and that sort of thing. And it just represents a little slice of life in a FOB life in the Marine Corps in Iraq. And it's one of my favorite images. Another one would have been, there's a sketch I did on a rooftop of a forward air controller, Marine aviator who's on the ground helping the infantry. And they're calling in an airstrike on an insurgent house about 200 meters away or so. We were all up on the roof, and so it was safe for me to draw. And so, because it's very rare to draw on a patrol, a lot of times
I would imagine.
right. The situation, it does not lend itself to being able to take the time to sketch usually, but I was able to do that, and so I got some good sketches of the Marines on the roof and the radio operator and the FAC calling in the airstrike. And so
I was wondering, do you sometimes like take a photo and then sketch it from that, you know, so you can refer it back to that moment in time, or is it more of a, you know, the picture of your eye?
So we do prefer that the sketches be done there. However, a lot of the times, let's say you're on the patrol and you're basically a combat cameraman, and you're walking around with your camera and you're trying to take a scene. So you will have to do the artwork from those images later on. So it can be a spectrum. Sometimes you'll be like in a training environment where you can have your camera and your sketch pad. You can follow the Marines. I was in Jordan recently, as a matter of fact, in July, and I was following the Marines as they did their final exercise, and I was walking behind them, sketching them as they were doing their assault into this training village, a little mout town, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And they, but I was able to. So every time they would fall down into position, and I was able to sketch them, I would very quickly take a photograph as well, just to get that information in case I needed to do it in a painting later on. So I've done all of those things. I've sketched directly from life. I've sketched in environments where I couldn't take a camera in. So everything done from that has to be from the sketch or from memory, but it's kind of a good mixture. Usually you're doing both. You're sketching and you're taking photographs, and then you're making drawings and paintings later on as well.
So when you're embedded with the troops, do some of them shy away, or some of them ham it up, try to get their image recorded for posterity, or some
Right.
others slide away? I'm sure there's a whole gamut.
Oh, absolutely. In some units, they understand what you do and they immediately embrace. Some call for you to come. Others look at you like you're some alien. And once in a while, some are actually like, "What are you doing here? Why are you wasting our time?" That sort of thing, right? That's
Hmm.
really, they're very, especially once they start seeing the product that you're producing and they start seeing their Marines depicted, and they start seeing their unit's story being told in this environment. They start really warming up, and then they figure out, oh, this is actually a very good thing. And so they're much more warm. But of course, then you have the when they warm up too much, then you have the Marines hamming it up for the sketch artist, and that's no good either.
Yeah, I figured there would be some spectrum there. You know,
Oh yeah.
it seemed to be smart to want to record some of these things. I mean, even if we serve, you know, a full career, it's only 20 years. You know,
Right.
it's a snapshot in life, and you know, memories fade and things fade, and but then you have these images that are just, you know, so solid, and capturing that particular moment in time, or this amalgamation of things. I'm sure there's some artistic license,
Right.
you know, that goes into it. Like, oh, I remember that. That's just like the urinals and the porta potties. You know, there's some of these little small things that sort of just strike at you. Memories get triggered.
Oh yeah. What's interesting, you talk about 20 years career. I had recently, there was a gentleman that I had met in Iraq who
Hmm.
I sketched when he was a sergeant years ago, and we were in this little one of the places I did another one of those drawings of those the urinals and that sort of thing. But we were down in the platoon area where he was actually on duty there at the desk, believe it or not, and I just did a sketch of him. didn't think anything of it, but he had seen it after they got back from Iraq. A couple of years later, his friends were saying, "Hey, is this you?" Because I put his name on the caption, and he said, "Yeah." And so his wife cherished that drawing, and he kept it too. And then 20 some odd years later, he's retiring, and his wife contacts me and says, "Hey, he's going to be retiring at the museum. Would you please attend they invited me to the retirement ceremony." And he actually had that from the collection. We had that sketch framed and had it in his retirement ceremony to the side. So people, when they were in the reception, could see that drawing. And what I did also, when he was talking, I actually sketched him while he was talking. So I put that little drawing unframed next to the drawing.
Oh, wow.
So he has a drawing of when he was a sergeant in Iraq, and then a drawing of his retirement speech done
many years later.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love those kind of stories. I mean, we always joke, I'm an Army guy. I've been around the Army my whole life, that the Army is a big, small town. And I'm sure the Marine Corps, being much smaller, is even more so.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Hey, Kris, we've talked about a lot of things. I'm sure there's something that I should have asked you about, but didn't. What should I have asked you about, but I sort of haven't gotten there yet?
Oh, that's a very good question. I guess I would just like to say that we're looking for all types and styles. We are generally realist, but our philosophy is we're going to send artists of different philosophies, different styles, different backgrounds, different ethnic varieties. We're going to send these artists out to these environments so that we can get a full picture of what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not just looking for one style of artwork. We do like realism, but we're looking for things which show that artist's eye and show that artist's outlook. And so we think that paints a better, broader picture, and ultimately a more complete picture of what goes on. And another thing perhaps would be, we believe that combat art simply tells the story in a way that is more emotionally touching, perhaps, and in a way more personal. And we always like to say that whenever you're there in that situation and you're sketching this individual, that Marine, it helps that person's morale, because they see the Marine Corps and the United States government has thought of that individual enough to send a combat artist out there and depict what that Marine and his unit or her unit is going through.
Mm-hmm.
A very important function we serve, not just for history, but for morale and for esprit, and to tell the common story, to get back to the parents and the families of these service people. So it's a very, we fulfill a role that's very, it's not just an anachronism, it's an important function.
No, it's amazing. And I really like the whole idea, because everybody's role is so important, whether you're a water and bath specialist or you're a machine gunner.
Right.
Everybody has a particular role to fill. And if they didn't need it, they wouldn't have it. And sometimes they get rid of things that they do need, even though they probably shouldn't, like combat artists. They try to do it on the cheap, or, like, hey, we've got fewer people, and it all depends on the needs at the time.
Right.
But yeah, if you don't have that great protagonist to push forward for something, it does get falls off to the wayside. I've seen it, and then they say, "Hey, we need this," and then they struggle and have to bring it back, and then it's a lot harder. So I'm glad to see that there's still vestiges of it. You still have folks out there doing it, and we'll put all the links if you are interested in being a combat artist with the Marine Corps. We'll put all the contact information. You get in touch with Kris Battles here. Create your portfolio, maybe deploy, get the travel paid for. If you're a civilian, or if you're a active duty person, you can also reach out, provide your portfolio. It's pretty amazing to be able to get paid to create artwork, or be able to go and see these things, to have the muse, so to speak, of, hey, what is combat like? What is this training like? What is the Marine Corps really like? Which you're not going to get necessarily, because, it's so surface level. And that's what I loved about when I was doing all the research for this show and seeing all the artwork. And there's all these small pieces, these insights, and these little flashes of time of things that nobody would normally pay attention to. the urinals and
Right.
the guy sitting around just reading a book with a little fire and an ammo can, getting ready to go on patrol.
Right.
That's not the exciting part, but it's a daily part of everybody's lives. Folks, we've been talking with Kris Battles. He's the artist in residence at the United States Marine Corps National Museum of the Marine Corps up there at Quantico. Go check out the national museums. They are absolutely fantastic. The Marine Corps one is, as you would expect, with all their history, just an absolutely great way to spend an afternoon. If you're headed up to DC, it's maybe a 45-minute drive out of DC. It's definitely something to put on your to-do list. We're all over the country, so if you're in Virginia like I am, it's not far. But if you're traveling to DC for all the Smithsonian's and all the other things, add it to your bucket list. It is absolutely amazing. Kris, thank you so much for joining us and Coming Home Well and sharing the story about how the sausage gets made and how you find the artist and all the things that makes it so possible.
Well, thanks, Tyler. I appreciate that. It's been great. And you've spoken very well about the art. I'm glad. It shows that you looked at this stuff very well, because it looks like you've described it very well, what we do.
I'm glad that I gave it credit. I was able to describe it with the amount of reverence that I have for it, because I was blown away. I love art. I have no artistic capabilities, but I know what I like. I go and I buy a lot of art when I'm traveling. Go to the small artist and find something that I like, and then I'm like, oh, I want that one, and that's what our house is full of. Because I can't do it, and I have to appreciate the folks who do. So it's hard to find cheap art, but if you can find the people who love art, you'll find great art.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, thanks, Kris. Thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well.
Thanks for joining us this week on Coming Home Well with Dr. Tyler Piron. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Thanks again. And until all are home and all are well, this is Coming Home Well.